The soft hum of conversation and the gentle clinking of silverware filled the air of the elegant New York City restaurant. Warm lighting bathed the space in a golden glow, casting delicate shadows over the crisp white tablecloths and the shimmering glasses of wine held by well-dressed patrons. Everything about the place exuded sophistication, the kind of restaurant where every dish was as much a work of art as it was a meal, and where the guests carried themselves with effortless confidence. Emma Brooks, however, felt anything but confident. She lingered outside for a moment, staring at her reflection in the glossy window. The city lights illuminated her delicate features, but her expression held uncertainty. Her dress, though carefully chosen, was secondhand. The black heels on her feet were scuffed, the result of too many hurried steps on uneven sidewalks. She clutched her phone tightly, drawing in a deep breath. "You can do this," she whispered to herself. This was a blind date, set up by her best friend, Jenny, who had been insistent. "Emma, you work too much. You never take time for yourself. Just one date, please." Jenny had begged, practically shoving the details into her phone. Emma had resisted at first. Dating wasn't exactly at the top of her priority list. Between her shifts at the diner and worrying about rent, romance had felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. But Jenny had been relentless, and after weeks of persuasion, Emma had finally relented. And now here she was. With another deep breath, she stepped inside. The shift in atmosphere was instant. The restaurant felt like another world, one far removed from the bustling streets outside. Soft jazz played in the background, blending seamlessly with the quiet conversations around her. The scent of rich, savory dishes drifted through the air, making her stomach tighten, not just from hunger, but from nerves. She glanced down at her phone. Table 7. Her heart pounded as her eyes flickered across the room, scanning the neatly arranged tables, searching for the one number that mattered. A few couples sat together, leaning in close, whispering over candlelight. A group of businessmen laughed over half-filled glasses of whiskey. Then, near the back, she spotted him. A man sat alone at a corner table, his dark hair neatly styled, his crisp button-down perfectly fitted. He was engrossed in his phone, his brow slightly furrowed, as if he were reading something important. His presence was striking, not just because he was undeniably handsome, but because there was something effortless about the way he sat, as though he belonged in places like this. That has to be him. Emma swallowed hard, wiping her sweaty palms against the fabric of her dress. She had promised Jenny she would go through with this. And besides, he looked normal enough. No obvious red flags. No creepy smirks or overconfident postures. Just a man waiting for his date. Forcing a bright smile, she stepped forward. "Hi, you must be Kevin," she said, trying to sound cheerful despite the way her stomach twisted with nerves. "I'm Emma. Nice to meet you." The man looked up, startled. His deep brown eyes met hers, flickering with confusion for a split second before he composed himself. His lips parted slightly as if he were about to say something, but then he hesitated. Hi," he said after a beat. Emma misread his hesitation as shyness. Jenny had mentioned that Kevin was a little reserved, a bit quiet but kind. That was fine. Emma had no problem carrying the conversation if needed. Sliding into the seat across from him, she folded her hands in her lap, trying not to fidget. "I know blind dates can be a little awkward, but don't worry. Jenny told me you might be the quiet type. I can talk enough for both of us." The man's lips twitched, almost as if he were amused. His fingers brushed over the screen of his phone before he finally set it down. "Right," he said slowly, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Blind dates are something else." Emma laughed nervously, reaching for a glass of water. "Tell me about it. Jenny's been trying to set me up for months, but I've always been too busy. Work, you know. Liam Parker, because that was his real name, not Kevin." Raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. "Work? I'm a waitress," Emma admitted, toying with the edge of her napkin. "Not exactly glamorous, but it pays the bills. Well, most of them, anyway." Liam watched her, something shifting in his expression. He had met countless people in his life, socialites, business executives, investors, people who always had an agenda. But Emma? She was different. She spoke with unfiltered honesty, as though she had nothing to prove. She had no idea who he was, and strangely, he found that refreshing. Emma took another sip of water, then tilted her head slightly. "What about you? Jenny said you work in tech." Liam hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding. "Yeah, something like that." Emma brightened. "Like coding and apps and stuff?" "I'm terrible with computers." Liam chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "It's a little more complicated than that." She smiled, completely unaware of the irony in his statement. As their conversation flowed, Liam found himself unexpectedly at ease. Emma was funny, warm, and animated when she spoke about her life. Her shifts at the diner, the difficult customers, the late-night sketching sessions when she finally had time to herself. She told him about her dream of opening an art studio, of teaching kids who couldn't afford expensive lessons. Liam, who had spent years surrounded by people who only cared about wealth and status, was utterly captivated. She wasn't like anyone he had ever met. "You're not what I expected," Emma said suddenly, her tone thoughtful. Liam raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Well, Jenny said you were reserved," she admitted, her cheeks flushing slightly. "But you're easy to talk to." Liam chuckled softly. "You're easy to talk to, too." Emma beamed at the compliment, her nerves finally easing. She was about to ask him more about his work when her phone buzzed. Glancing down, she read the message. "Hey Emma, where are you? I'm at table 7. Looking forward to meeting you. Kevin." Her smile faded. Her heart plummeted as she reread the message, a sinking realization dawning on her. Slowly, she looked up at Liam, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. Her voice barely above a whisper, she asked, "You're not Kevin, are you?" Liam's smile faltered, guilt flickering in his eyes. "No," he admitted, his voice quiet. "I'm not." Emma's stomach twisted in mortification. "Oh my God," she muttered, standing abruptly. I'm so sorry. I sat at the wrong table. This is so embarrassing." "Wait," Liam said, rising to his feet as well. "Emma, it's okay, But she was already grabbing her coat, bolting for the door before he could finish his sentence. Liam watched her go, an unfamiliar mix of regret and curiosity swirling in his chest. He had intended to correct her from the start, but now, as she disappeared into the night, he found himself wondering why the thought of never seeing her again bothered him so much. Liam sat alone in his penthouse, the glow of the city skyline spilling through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. Normally, this view was a comfort, a silent reminder of everything he had built, the empire he had created. But tonight it felt hollow. His glass of whiskey sat untouched on the table beside him, the ice melting, condensation pooling beneath it. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, his fingers laced together as he stared out over the city. His mind, however, was stuck in one place. Emma, the way she had smiled when she talked about her art, her dreams, the way she had laughed without pretense, completely unguarded, the way her cheeks had flushed when he had told her she was easy to talk to. The moment she had realized the truth, that he wasn't Kevin, and the way she had bolted from the restaurant, her embarrassment practically radiating off her. He had meant to stop her, but he hadn't. And now, he was sitting here, replaying every second of their conversation in his mind, completely unable to shake the feeling that he had let something slip through his fingers before he even had the chance to understand what it was. Emma Brooks had been different from anyone he had met in years, maybe ever. Unlike the women in his world, the socialites, the ambitious networkers, the ones who saw him for his net worth before they ever truly saw him. Emma had thought he was ordinary, just another guy sitting in a restaurant, waiting for a blind date. And for a brief moment that had felt good. No expectations, no rehearsed conversations, no polite flattery designed to impress or manipulate. Just real, honest conversation with a woman who had no idea she had been sitting across from a billionaire. Liam exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. This wasn't like him. He didn't get stuck on people. He didn't chase after things that didn't make sense. And yet, for some reason, he found himself wondering if he'd ever see her again, and why the thought of never seeing her again made his chest tighten just a little. Across town, Emma flopped onto the couch in her tiny apartment, burying her face into a throw pillow. "I want to disappear," she groaned, her voice muffled by the fabric. From across the room, Jenny didn't even bother looking up from her laptop. "That bad, huh?" Emma turned her head just enough to glare at her. "Worse." Jenny finally closed her laptop, setting it aside before leaning forward, intrigued. "What happened? Did Kevin turn out to be a serial killer?" Emma groaned louder. "I wouldn't know. I never even made it to Kevin." Jenny's brows furrowed. "What do you mean?" Emma sat up, grabbing a pillow and hugging it against her chest. "I sat at the wrong table, Jenny." Jenny blinked. "Wait, what?" "I went to the wrong table," Emma repeated, her voice rising. "I thought I was meeting Kevin, but I just walked up to some random guy and introduced myself." Jenny stared at her for a long moment before she burst out laughing. Emma smacked her with the pillow. "Not funny. It's hilarious." Jenny wheezed, doubling over. "Oh my God, please tell me you figured it out immediately." Emma groaned, flopping back against the couch. "I had an entire conversation with him first." Jenny gasped dramatically, clutching her chest. "Emma, no." "Oh, it gets worse," Emma mumbled, staring at the ceiling. "He went along with it. I sat there talking about my job, my art, my struggles. Meanwhile, he's just letting me think he's Kevin." Jenny wiped at her eyes, still laughing. Okay, but was he at least cute?" Emma hesitated, then groaned again, shoving the pillow over her face. "Yes." Jenny's grin widened. "So, let me get this straight. You sat at the wrong table, talked to the wrong guy, and had a great time before realizing your mistake?" "That's one way to put it," Emma mumbled. Jenny leaned back, crossing her arms. "So, maybe he liked talking to you." Emma peeked out from behind the pillow. "What?" Jenny shrugged. "Think about it. He could have corrected you at any point, but he didn't. Maybe he enjoyed the conversation too." Emma's lips pressed together. She hadn't thought about it like that. "Would you recognize him if you saw him again?" Jenny asked. Emma considered the question, but the moment she pictured his face, a warm, unexpected flutter ran through her chest. She frowned, shoving the feeling away. "It doesn't matter," she muttered. "I embarrass myself beyond repair. There's no way I'll ever see him again." But across the city, Liam Parker sat in his office the next morning, staring blankly at his schedule as Claire, his assistant, ran through his appointments. "Your lunch with Rothman is at noon, followed by—" "Cancel the lunch," Liam said suddenly. Claire stopped mid-sentence. She slowly lowered the tablet in her hands and raised an eyebrow. "Come again." "Cancel it," Liam repeated, still lost in thought. Claire studied him for a moment before sighing and tapping on her screen. "All right, I'll bite. What's going on with you? You've been distracted since last night." Liam hesitated. He wasn't the kind of man who explained himself, but something about the way Emma had looked at him before running out of that restaurant lingered in his mind. "I met someone," he admitted. Claire's eyebrows shot up. "Met someone? Like met someone or met someone?" Liam leaned back in his chair, rubbing his jaw. "It was an accident." Claire narrowed her eyes. "Liam Parker does not have accidents when it comes to women." Liam exhaled sharply. "She thought I was someone else." Claire blinked. "Wait, what?" Liam gave her a look, clearly not in the mood to repeat himself. Claire's lips twitched. "You mean to tell me a woman mistook you for someone else? And instead of correcting her, you just went along with it?" Liam didn't answer. Claire's grin widened. "Oh, this is good." Liam ignored her, pulling out his phone. He stared at the screen for a long moment before typing out a message. "Emma, this is Liam, the guy from the restaurant. I know it was a mix-up, but I'd like to see you again. Coffee, maybe?" He hesitated for a fraction of a second before pressing send. Claire, still watching him like a hawk, crossed her arms. "Oh, you're definitely in trouble." Liam barely heard her, because now, all he could do was wait. Emma stared at her phone, rereading the message for the 10th time. "Emma, this is Liam, the guy from the restaurant. I know it was a mix-up, but I'd like to see you again. Coffee, maybe?" She had half a mind to ignore it. After all, she had made an absolute fool of herself that night, walking up to a stranger and chatting away like an idiot while he had just sat there, probably laughing at her the entire time. But had he? He hadn't mocked her. He hadn't brushed her off. He had listened. engaged, laughed at her stories in a way that it felt completely real. And now, he was texting her. If he thought it was just a joke, why would he want to see her again? Jenny, who had been reading over her shoulder, grinned. Told you he liked talking to you. Emma shot her a glare before looking back at her phone. She hesitated, fingers hovering over the keyboard. It wouldn't hurt, would it? It was just coffee. Okay, coffee sounds nice. The response was sent before she could overthink it. Liam's reply came almost immediately. Great. There's a place on Lexington, Blackbird Cafe. Tomorrow at 2? Emma chewed her lip before typing a quick, see you then, and setting her phone down, exhaling. Jenny, watching with barely contained excitement, nudged her. You're blushing. I am not. You so are. Emma grabbed a pillow and hurled it at her. The next afternoon, Emma approached the small cafe with cautious steps. She had half expected Liam to pick some five-star coffee house in a hotel lobby, the kind of place where a single espresso cost more than her entire grocery bill. But Blackbird Cafe was nothing like that. It was quaint and cozy, tucked between a bookstore and a florist, with ivy curling around the windows and a chalkboard sign outside listing the day's specials. A soft scent of cinnamon and fresh coffee beans drifted into the street, wrapping around her like a warm embrace. Through the window, she spotted him. Liam was already there, seated at a corner table. And this time, he looked different. Gone was the sharp business attire from the restaurant. Today, he wore a simple gray sweater with the sleeves pushed up to his elbows, paired with dark jeans. He looked normal, approachable, like someone who actually fit into this setting instead of towering over it like he owned the place. Emma exhaled and stepped inside. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, and Liam looked up immediately, meeting her gaze. For a split second, something softened in his expression, as if he hadn't been entirely sure she would show up. Emma crossed the cafe toward him, forcing herself to stay relaxed. Hey, he said, standing slightly as she reached the table. Thanks for coming. She slid into the seat across from him, offering a small smile. Figured I owed you an apology for running out like that. Liam chuckled, sitting back down. No apology necessary. I imagine realizing you were talking to the wrong person was a bit of a shock. You could say that, Emma admitted, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I think my soul left my body for a minute. That made him laugh, really laugh, and something about the sound eased the tension in her shoulders. A waitress came by, and they both ordered coffee, black for Liam, a vanilla latte for Emma. So, Liam said, once the waitress had left, how's your week been? Besides the whole mistaken identity blind date situation. Emma smirked. Oh, you know the usual. Work, dealing with customers who think I control the price of pancakes, making sure my rent check doesn't bounce. Living the dream. Liam rested his elbow on the table, his fingers drumming lightly against his coffee cup. You really don't hold back, do you? She shrugged. What's the point? Life's too short to pretend everything's perfect. Liam found himself watching her again, intrigued. Honesty was something he rarely encountered. In his world, people spoke in rehearsed lines, careful and calculated, always measuring their words like currency. But Emma spoke with complete transparency, as if she didn't know how to be anything else. So, tell me more about this art studio dream of yours, he said, leaning in slightly. Emma's eyes lit up. Oh, well, it's probably a long shot, but I've always wanted to open a space for young artists. You know, a place where kids who don't have the money for expensive lessons can come and create without limits. Art was my escape growing up. I'd love to give that to someone else. Liam didn't respond right away. He just studied her, something unreadable flickering behind his eyes. What? Emma asked, suddenly self-conscious. Nothing, he said, a small smile tugging at his lips. I just think it's incredible. Not a lot of people chase dreams like that, especially when it's not about money. Emma huffed a laugh. Well, I'd love for it to be my job one day. But yeah, it's not about making millions. I don't know. I want to do something that matters. Liam's grip on his coffee cup tightened slightly. He knew what it was like to build something from the ground up. He had done it himself, but he had done it for power, for success, for proving to the world and to himself that he could. But Emma? She wanted to build something purely for the love of it. And that, more than anything, fascinated him. The conversation stretched on, flowing effortlessly. She told him about her mother, how she worked 2 jobs just to keep them afloat when Emma was younger, how she's still worried about her now, with medical bills piling up. "You're incredibly resilient," Liam said at one point, his admiration slipping through. Emma snorted. "Resilient or stubborn? Take your pick." Liam chuckled. "Sometimes they're the same thing." Emma found herself smiling more than she had in months. And Liam? For the first time in years, he felt normal. No corporate meetings. No high-stakes negotiations. No guarded conversations. Just coffee with a woman who made him laugh and reminded him of things he hadn't thought about in a long time. By the time the afternoon sun began dipping toward the horizon, neither of them had touched their phones once. Eventually, Emma glanced at her watch and sighed. "I should probably head back before Ginny starts sending out a search party." Liam smirked. "She sounds persistent. You have no idea." They both stood, neither quite sure how to end the moment. Liam cleared his throat. "Would it be okay if I texted you again?" Emma hesitated for only a second before nodding. "Yeah, I think I'd like that." Liam smiled, and Emma turned to leave, stepping into the late afternoon air. As she walked away, she found herself still smiling. And inside the cafe, Liam watched her go, already knowing one thing for certain. He didn't want this connection to end. Emma hadn't expected to hear from Liam again so soon. But only a day after their coffee meeting, another message popped up on her phone. "You mentioned a favorite park. I like to see it. Show me where you get your inspiration." She hesitated for only a second before replying. "Tomorrow afternoon. Hope you like ducks." The next day, Liam found himself standing at the entrance of a small but charming park tucked away in the city. It wasn't the kind of manicured space that billionaires frequented. There were no pristine fountains or sculptures, no meticulously maintained flower beds. But there was something real about it. Winding paths curved around patches of wildflowers. A small pond shimmered under the sunlight, and children ran laughing across the open grass. Artists sat on benches with their sketchbooks. An old man played chess with himself, and near the pond, a little girl tossed breadcrumbs to a group of eager ducks. Liam exhaled. "It felt peaceful. Didn't think you'd actually show," Emma teased, appearing beside him. She had a tote bag slung over her shoulder, a coffee in one hand, and a sketchbook tucked under her arm. Liam smirked. "I'm a man of my word." Emma gave him a skeptical look. "I'll believe that when I see it." She led him down one of the paths, pausing here and there to point out small things. A tree with initials carved into its bark, the bench where she once watched a street performer dance in the rain, the way the light hit the pond at a certain time of day. "You really pay attention," Liam noted, watching her as she gazed across the water. "Kind of a requirement for an artist," she said with a smile, dropping onto a bench and pulling out her sketchbook. "I like to capture the little things most people don't notice." She flipped open the book, revealing page after page of intricate pencil sketches. Liam sat beside her, studying them in quiet amazement. There were portraits, sharp, emotional expressions captured with a few perfect strokes. Landscapes, tiny street corners, rain-slicked sidewalks, the diner where she worked. There were sketches of children, of strangers she had passed, of moments frozen in time. "Emma," he murmured, flipping another page, "these are incredible." She shrugged, pretending the compliment didn't mean something. "They're just sketches. They're more than that." His fingers brushed across a drawing of an elderly couple sitting on a park bench, their hands entwined. "You have a way of seeing people." Emma looked at him then, tilting her head slightly. "And what do I see when I look at you?" Liam hesitated. If she sketched him, what would she capture? A man who had spent years building an empire, but still wasn't sure what he was searching for? A man who had more wealth than he could ever use, but felt oddly weightless when he was with her, like money was the least interesting thing about him? "I don't know," he said finally. Emma studied him for a moment longer, then smirked. "I'll let you know when I figure it out." It became a pattern. Over the next few weeks, Liam and Emma continued meeting, their worlds colliding in ways neither of them had anticipated. She took him to hidden spots in the city, places she loved, Museums with free entry on Thursdays, hole-in-the-wall cafes where the owners knew her name, street markets where she bartered for art supplies. He listened to her talk about art, about life, about the struggles of making ends meet. And while she spoke, he began collecting her work, covertly, of course. Whenever she left a sketch behind in a cafe or crumpled a drawing she thought wasn't good enough, he took them. He told himself it was because they were beautiful, because they deserved to be saved. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. One evening, as they walked back from the market, Emma stopped abruptly outside a small convenience store. "Hold this," she said, shoving her bag at him. Before he could respond, she had disappeared inside. When she returned, she was carrying 3 plastic grocery bags, shifting them awkwardly in her arms. Liam raised an eyebrow. "You know, most people make 2 trips. Most people don't live on the 3rd floor of a building with a broken elevator," she shot back, adjusting her grip. Liam didn't hesitate. He reached out, taking the bag from her before she could protest. "Lead the way," he said simply. Emma stared at him for a second before shaking her head. "You're gonna regret this." He didn't, but he wasn't prepared for what he found when she unlocked the door to her apartment. It was small, tiny even. The living room barely fit a couch and a bookshelf, and the kitchen was more of a corner than an actual space. The walls were old, the paint chipped in places, the floors creaked with every step. But it was alive. Art supplies covered the coffee table. Canvas and brushes leaned against the walls. A dozen sketches were taped haphazardly near the window, fluttering slightly from the breeze outside. There was warmth here, creativity, a life being built with passion rather than privilege. Liam set the bags down on the kitchen counter, glancing around. "This place has character," he said diplomatically. Emma snorted. "That's one way to put it." She began unpacking the groceries, stacking cans in the cupboard, moving through the space with the ease of someone who had learned to make do with little. Liam found himself watching her. It wasn't the first time he had been inside a modest home. He had grown up in one, but it had been years since he had been in a space that felt so real. "Your mom," he said suddenly. "You mentioned she works a lot?" Emma glanced at him, nodding. "Yeah, she used to have 2 jobs, but she had to cut back when her health got worse. Medical bills keep piling up, though. I try to help where I can." Liam leaned against the counter, absorbing that. Emma wasn't just working to survive. She was working to support someone else, to keep her mother afloat. He had known she was strong, but now he understood that her strength wasn't just about resilience. It was about sacrifice, and that made him admire her even more, but also made him feel something else. Guilt, because she had no idea who he really was. He had the kind of wealth that could make all of this, her struggles, her worries, disappear in an instant. He could pay off her mother's medical bills without a second thought, buy her an art studio, ensure she never had to work a shift at that diner again. But she didn't want saving. She wanted to build something for herself. And as much as he wanted to help, he knew that telling her the truth now, revealing who he really was, would change everything. For the first time in his life, Liam Parker wasn't sure if honesty would fix things, or if it would break them. The invitation had been impulsive. Emma hadn't even thought twice before blurting it out one evening as she and Liam walked through the city streets, sipping on cheap coffee and debating whether pineapple belonged on pizza. "There's a gallery opening this weekend," she had said. "It's small, local artists, but the pieces are incredible. You should come." She had half expected him to make an excuse. But instead, Liam had given her one of those quiet, unreadable looks before nodding. "I'd love to." And now, as Emma stepped into the brightly lit gallery, she felt oddly nervous. She had been looking forward to this event for weeks, ever since one of her favorite painters had announced he would be showcasing a new series. Art galleries weren't just about admiring work for her. They were about inspiration, about stepping into someone else's emotions and seeing the world through their eyes. But tonight, something felt different. Maybe it was because Liam was here. She wasn't sure why it mattered. She wasn't sure why, after weeks of knowing him, there was still a tiny, insistent part of her that questioned what he was doing with her. He didn't belong in places like her tiny apartment. He didn't flinch when she talked about struggling to pay rent. And even though he never dressed extravagantly, there was still something about him, about the way he carried himself, about the way he moved through the world that made him feel different. Too different. She shook off the thought and focused on the art. They moved slowly through the gallery, stopping at each piece, Emma explaining the techniques, the details, the emotions behind the strokes. Liam listened, asked questions, studied each painting with the kind of quiet intensity that made her stomach flutter. But then she saw it. The painting was near the back, tucked into a quieter section of the room. It wasn't the biggest or the most colorful piece in the gallery, but the moment Emma laid eyes on it, her feet stopped moving. It was a father and daughter sitting by a lake at sunset. The brushstrokes were soft, almost dreamlike, the colors muted but warm. The little girl's hand was small in her father's, her feet swinging over the edge of a wooden dock. The man's face wasn't detailed, but the way his body leaned toward the girl, the way their hands touched, it was unmistakable. Emma's breath hitched. Her father. Not really, of course. This was someone else's memory, someone else's story. But it felt like hers. Memories crashed into her, unbidden. Her father teaching her how to skip stones across the lake. His deep laughter when hers plopped into the water without bouncing. The scent of pine and earth as she sat beside him. Her small hands sketching fish that never stayed still long enough. Gone. It had been years, but the ache never really left. A tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. Emma. Liam's voice was gentle, careful. She turned away quickly, swiping at her face. Sorry. She let out a small, shaky laugh. I didn't expect that. Liam didn't say anything at first. Then, after a moment, he reached out, his hand a warm, steady weight on her shoulder. He'd be proud of you, he said softly. Emma looked up at him, startled. The words shouldn't have meant so much. But somehow they did. She swallowed, nodding slightly, her chest tight. Thanks, she whispered. They didn't talk about it after that. Instead, they wandered through the rest of the gallery in comfortable silence. Liam keeping just a little closer than before, as if some invisible thread had shifted between them. It wasn't until later, as they walked out into the cool night air, that Emma finally voiced the question that had been sitting in the back of her mind for weeks. Why do you spend time with me? Liam glanced sideways at her. What do you mean? Emma hesitated. You could be anywhere, with anyone, but you're here, with me. I just don't get it. Liam exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. Because I like being around you. That's not an answer. It's the truth. Emma frowned. Yeah, but... Emma. Liam stopped walking, turning to face her fully. Does it have to be more complicated than that? She stared at him. There was something in his eyes, something unreadable, like he was holding on to words he wasn't sure he should say. And maybe she should have pushed further. Maybe she should have questioned why every time she asked something personal, he gave her just enough to satisfy her curiosity without ever really answering. But instead, she let it go. For now. Later that night, Emma sat cross-legged on the couch, scrolling absently through her phone. Jenny was half asleep beside her, a crime documentary playing softly on the TV, but Emma wasn't really paying attention. Her mind was still at the gallery, still on Liam, still on the feeling that there was something just out of reach, something she wasn't seeing. A headline caught her eye. Liam Parker, the elusive tech billionaire expands philanthropic efforts. Emma barely glanced at it before continuing to scroll. But then, a second later, her brain caught up with her eyes. She froze. Slowly, she scrolled back up, her heart pounding for reasons she couldn't explain. The article was accompanied by a photograph. A sharply dressed man. Dark hair, strong jaw, familiar eyes. Emma's stomach dropped. No. Her pulse roared in her ears as she stared at the image, her brain scrambling to make sense of what she was seeing. She clicked the article. Liam Parker, founder and CEO of Parker Industries, continues to lead the tech world with his innovative solutions and billion-dollar investments. Known for his fiercely private lifestyle, Parker rarely appears at public events, choosing instead to focus on his work and selective philanthropic ventures. Emma couldn't breathe. She scrolled down, finding another photo, this one at some charity gala. Liam standing in a perfectly tailored suit, shaking hand with other men who probably owned half the city. Liam Parker, billionaire, CEO, not Kevin. not a guy who worked in tech. Not. Emma's hands were shaking. He had lied. All this time. Every single moment. Every conversation. Every time he had sat across from her, listening to her talk about money struggles, about rent, about her mother's hospital bills. He had known. He had known and said nothing. Emma sucked in a sharp breath. Jenny stirred beside her, blinking blearily. What's wrong? Emma couldn't speak. She just turned the phone around. Jenny squinted at the screen. Then her eyes widened. Wait, she breathed, sitting up. Is that? Emma nodded stiffly. Jenny's mouth fell open. Holy. But Emma was already standing, her chest tight, her mind racing. She needed air. She needed space. And most of all, she needed to figure out what the hell she was supposed to do now. The grand ballroom shimmered under the glow of crystal chandeliers, the soft hum of conversation mingling with the delicate clinking of champagne glasses. Men in tailored tuxedos and women in glittering evening gowns moved gracefully through the space, exchanging polite smiles and carefully curated pleasantries. It was the kind of world Emma had never been a part of, one she had never even come close to touching. And yet, here she was. She stood near the back of the room, unnoticed among the glittering crowd, her hands curled into fists at her sides. Her heart pounded so violently she could hear it in her ears, drowning out the meaningless conversations around her. On the stage at the front of the room, the event organizer beamed as he addressed the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we are honored to recognize an individual whose generosity has made this event possible. His contributions to education, to technology, and to the arts have changed countless lives. Please join me in welcoming our esteemed benefactor, Mr. Liam Parker. Applause erupted. Emma barely heard it. She couldn't breathe as she watched him step onto the stage, his expression composed, his signature confidence effortlessly in place. He looked different here, polished, powerful, every bit the billionaire he had hidden from her. Not the Liam who had laughed with her over bad coffee. Not the Liam who had carried her groceries up 3 flights of stairs. Not the Liam who had sat beside her on a park bench, marveling at her sketches like they were something extraordinary. No, that had been a lie. All of it. Emma's stomach twisted as he took the microphone, his deep voice filling the room. Thank you. It's always a privilege to support initiatives that create opportunities for those who need them most. And while tonight is about giving back, I'd like to take a moment to recognize the artists whose work is being showcased, because at the end of the day, it's their talent that deserves to be celebrated. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Emma barely heard it. She was too busy hearing the echoes of every conversation they'd ever had, every moment when he could have told her the truth. What do you do? I work in tech. Why do you spend time with me? Because I like being around you. Isn't that enough? Lies. Every carefully chosen word. Every evasion. Every moment of silence where the truth should have been. He had let her sit there, pouring her heart out, telling him about her financial struggles, her mother's medical bills, knowing all along that he could have changed her life with a phone call. And he had said nothing. The applause faded. Liam stepped down from the stage, shaking hands, offering warm, practiced smiles. People clapped him on the back, congratulating him, admiring him. Emma moved before she could talk herself out of it. Her pulse roared in her ears as she stepped through the crowd, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Liam turned just as she reached him, his easy smile still in place, until he saw her. His expression shifted instantly. Emma, he breathed, as if he couldn't quite believe she was standing there. She didn't waste time. So, you're Liam Parker. The words sliced through the air, cold and sharp as glass. Liam stiffened. His eyes searched hers, his entire body going still. Emma folded her arms across her chest, tilting her head slightly. Care to explain why you lied to me? People were starting to glance over. Liam noticed, shifting slightly, lowering his voice. Emma, not here. Emma let out a short, humorless laugh. Oh, I'm sorry. Should I have scheduled a meeting with your assistant? She took a step closer, her voice dropping just enough for only him to hear. Or would you have just kept stringing me along? Liam exhaled, running a hand through his hair. It wasn't like that, wasn't it? Emma's voice wavered, but she held her ground. You let me think you were just some guy, some normal guy who worked in tech. You sat there and let me talk about struggling to pay rent, about my mom's hospital bills, about how much I wished I could afford an art studio. And the whole time, you were sitting on more money than I'll probably ever see in my lifetime. You lied to me, Liam. He flinched at the way she said his name. Not like before. Not like it meant something. He swallowed hard. I didn't mean to. At first, he sighed, shaking his head. That night at the restaurant, you thought I was someone else. And for the first time in years, I wasn't Liam Parker, the CEO. I was just a guy having dinner with a woman who didn't care about money or business deals or networking. I didn't want to lose that. Emma's breath caught. That wasn't fair. It wasn't fair that he sounded so genuine, that his voice was laced with something close to regret, something that almost made her believe he hadn't meant to hurt her. But the hurt was already there. She lifted her chin. So what, Liam? You just planned to keep pretending forever? No, he said quickly. I wanted to tell you. I was going to. He exhaled sharply. I didn't know how. Emma let out a shaky breath. You didn't know how? She shook her head. You should have just told me the truth. Liam stepped closer, lowering his voice, his eyes desperate now. Emma, please. Everything else was real. Every conversation, every moment we connected, that was real. Emma's chest ached, but she didn't let it show. Because now, she didn't know what real even meant. You should have told me, she whispered. From the start, Liam reached for her then, just the smallest movement, like he wanted to grab her hand, to stop her from leaving. But Emma took a step back, and Liam froze. Tears burned in the back of her throat, but she refused to let them fall. She had trusted him. She had felt something for him, and now she didn't know if it had ever been real. Emma turned before he could say anything else. She walked away, her heels clicking against the marble, her vision blurred, her heart pounding. She didn't look back, and Liam just stood there, watching her go, knowing he had just lost the one thing that had ever felt real. Liam sat in his penthouse, staring out at the city skyline. The view, which had always been a source of comfort, a reminder of everything he had built, every deal he had won, felt empty tonight. The city lights stretched for miles, but they didn't shine the way Emma's eyes had when she talked about her art. She was gone. He had lost her. And the worst part? He couldn't even blame her. Claire stepped into the room, holding a tablet, ready to go over his schedule. But the moment she saw his expression, she sighed and set it aside. So, she said, crossing her arms, are you going to sulk forever, or are you actually going to do something about it? Liam didn't respond. Claire walked closer, lowering her voice. She walked away because she didn't trust you, Liam. And for good reason. You lied to her. You can say all the right words, but if you want her back, you need to prove that you meant every single thing you said. Liam looked at her, his jaw tense. Ow! Claire exhaled, shaking her head. You tell me, what does she love more than anything? That was easy. Her art, her dreams, the things she had spent years fighting for, working herself to exhaustion to afford. The things she had nearly given up on because life had been too hard, because there had never been enough money, because people like her didn't always get the luxury of chasing passion. And then Liam knew. 2 weeks later, Emma sat on Jenny's couch, scrolling through job listings with a cup of tea balanced on her knee. It had been days since she had last seen Liam, but the sting of betrayal hadn't faded. It wasn't just that he had lied. It was that he had let her fall for a version of him that didn't exist. That he had sat beside her, listened to every story about her struggles, and said nothing. Jenny walked into the room, tossing her phone onto the couch beside Emma. You need to get dressed, she announced. Emma frowned, setting down her tea. What? Jenny smirked. You'll see. Emma groaned. Jenny, I swear if this is one of your. Jenny cut her off by grabbing her hands and pulling her to her feet. Trust me. Emma rolled her eyes, but let herself be dragged toward the door. When they arrived in front of a small art gallery on the corner of a quiet street, Emma stopped in her tracks. Her heart stuttered in her chest. She knew this place. She had walked past it 100 times, always lingering at the window, imagining what it would be like to have her work displayed in a space like this. But tonight, something was different. The front window had a sign. Special exhibit, the art of Emma Brooks. Emma's breath caught. What? She turned to Jenny, her pulse racing. "What is this?" Jenny just grinned. "Go inside." Emma's feet carried her forward, her hands trembling as she pushed open the door. The space was filled with light, warm and inviting. And on the walls, Emma's artwork. Every piece she had ever poured her soul into. Her sketches, her paintings, her charcoal studies. The small, intimate portraits of strangers on the subway. The landscapes she had drawn on napkins in coffee shops. Even the pieces she had abandoned, deeming them not good enough. They were here, framed, hung carefully, displayed as if they belonged in a place like this. Emma walked through the gallery in stunned silence, her fingertips brushing the edges of each frame. Her chest ached. Who had done this? Her question was answered when she reached the center of the room. On a pedestal sat a single envelope. Her name was written across the front in familiar handwriting. Hands shaking, she picked it up and unfolded the note inside. "Your art deserves the world, just like you deserve honesty, love, and someone who sees you for who you are." "Let me try again." "Liam." Emma's throat tightened. She turned, her heart hammering, and saw him. Liam stood near the entrance, his hands in his pockets, watching her with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. For the first time, he didn't look like the powerful CEO, the billionaire with endless resources. He just looked like a man waiting for a woman to decide if he was worth forgiving. Emma swallowed hard. "You bought this place?" Liam nodded. "Not for me. For you." Her chest rose and fell as she tried to process it. "Why?" "Because it's what you deserve," he said simply. "Because you should never have to fight so hard for something that already belongs to you." Emma stared at him, emotions tangling inside her. He had lied. He had broken her trust. But he had also done this. Not with money. With belief. Belief in her. In her talent. In her dream. Emma glanced around the gallery, at the pieces of herself displayed for the world to see. "You can hate me forever," Liam said softly, stepping closer. "But please don't stop believing in yourself." Emma met his eyes. "I don't hate you," she whispered. Liam exhaled. "That's a start." She hesitated, heart pounding. I don't know if I could trust you again." His expression was raw, open in a way she had never seen before. "I'll spend the rest of my life proving that you can." Emma's breath hitched. Loving someone was easy. Trusting them after they had broken something fragile, that was the hard part. But standing in this space, her space, she knew one thing for certain. She still loved him. Maybe she always would. Slowly, she took a step forward. And for the first time in weeks, Liam smiled. Emma stood in the middle of the gallery, her fingers tracing the edge of Liam's note as the weight of everything settled over her. This was her dream. The space, the walls lined with her art, the quiet hum of possibility in the air. It was everything she had ever imagined but never truly believed she could have. And Liam had given it to her. Not with grand gestures of wealth, not with the careless flick of a pen on a check, but by seeing her, by believing in her even when she had doubted herself. She turned to face him. He was standing there, hands in his pockets, waiting. His expression was steady, but there was something vulnerable in the way he held himself, like he was prepared for her to walk away, but still hoping she wouldn't. "You really did all of this," she murmured, glancing around the space again. "For you," Liam said simply. Emma let out a shaky breath. "Liam, I can't pretend what you did didn't hurt me. I know. You lied to me." "I did." She looked at him, searching his face. "And you won't do it again?" His gaze never wavered. Never. Emma's heart pounded. She wanted to believe him, and a part of her already did. She thought about everything they had been through. Every moment when he could have walked away, when he could have chosen the easy path of letting her go. But he hadn't. He had stayed. He had fought for her. For them. She took a slow step forward, closing the space between them. "If I do this, if I give you a second chance, there can't be any more secrets." Liam exhaled, his shoulders easing slightly. "No more secrets." She held his gaze for a long moment, searching for any hesitation. But there was none. Then, slowly, she nodded. Liam let out a breath like he had been holding it in for weeks, his lips curling into the smallest, most genuine smile she had ever seen. Emma wasn't sure who moved first, but suddenly she was in his arms, his warmth surrounding her, the scent of him familiar and steady. His arms wrapped tightly around her, as if he wasn't willing to let her slip away again. And for the first time since she had discovered the truth, Emma let herself believe. Months passed, and Emma threw herself into the gallery, pouring her heart into every brushstroke, every exhibit, every late night spent curating new pieces from young, struggling artists who reminded her so much of herself. Liam was there through all of it, not as a benefactor, not as a billionaire fixing problems with money, but as the man who believed in her, as the man who showed up with coffee when she stayed too late working, as the man who listened to her ramble about color theory and lighting placement like it was the most interesting thing in the world, as the man who stood by her side, not to save her, but to walk beside her. And when the gallery's grand opening finally arrived, Emma couldn't believe how far she had come. The space buzzed with life, people moving through the exhibits, admiring the work, whispering about the pieces. Young artists, some of whom had never had their work displayed before, stood nervously in the corner, watching strangers appreciate something they had created. Emma smiled, her heart full as she watched them. Liam appeared at her side, slipping his hand into hers. "It's incredible, Emma." She turned to him, squeezing his fingers. "It wouldn't have happened without you." His expression softened. "No, this was always going to happen. You just needed to believe it could." Emma opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Liam was stepping forward, drawing the attention of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying over the murmurs. "Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate the incredible talent on these walls. But I'd like to take a moment to recognize the woman behind it all." Emma's breath caught as every eye in the room turned toward her. Liam smiled. Emma Brooks is not only an extraordinary artist, but she is also someone who sees the world differently. She sees beauty where others don't. She believes in people who haven't yet learned to believe in themselves. And she has built something here that will change lives. That deserves to be celebrated. The room filled with applause, but Emma barely heard it over the pounding of her own heart. Because Liam was reaching into his pocket, because he was dropping to one knee, and because, suddenly, the entire world had shrunk down to the man kneeling in front of her, holding a small velvet box. Emma's hands flew to her mouth, her pulse roaring in her ears. Liam's voice was steady, filled with something raw and real. "You sat at the wrong table that night," he murmured, his lips curling at the memory. "But it turned out to be the best mistake either of us ever made." Emma let out a shaky laugh, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break. "I love you," Liam continued. "Not because of what you create, not because of what you do, but because of who you are. Because you challenge me. Because you make me want to be better. Because my life doesn't feel right without you in it." The room was silent, the air thick with anticipation. Liam looked up at her, his eyes steady. "Emma Brooks, will you marry me?" Tears blurred her vision. She had spent so long believing that love wasn't something meant for people like her, that fairy tales only belonged to others. But here was Liam, not perfect, not without mistakes, but real, and hers. Emma inhaled sharply, her voice trembling. "Only if you promise," she swallowed, steadying herself. "No more secrets." Liam's lips curved, his eyes shining. "No more secrets." Emma nodded, and then, with a bright, tear-filled smile, she whispered, "Yes." The room erupted in applause, but all Emma could hear was the way Liam exhaled, relief flooding his features as he slid the ring onto her finger. And when he stood, pulling her into his arms, pressing his forehead against hers, Emma knew. This was it. Not a perfect love, but real love. The wedding was small, intimate, and perfect, held in the very gallery Emma had built, surrounded by the art that had brought them together. It was a celebration of everything they had fought for. There was no grand extravagance, no over-the-top spectacle, just the people who mattered, just quiet laughter, the soft glow of candlelight, the gentle hum of music. And as the evening faded, as the last guest drifted home, Emma and Liam found themselves alone beneath the golden light of the gallery, swaying slowly to a song that neither of them knew the name of. Liam's arms wrapped around her, his chin resting against her forehead. Emma closed her eyes, leaning into him, feeling the warmth of his breath against her skin. "You know," she murmured, smiling softly, "I'm glad I sat at the wrong table." Liam chuckled, his grip tightening slightly. It was the best mistake either of us ever made. And as they danced beneath the lights, wrapped in each other, Emma knew one thing for certain. Some mistakes were meant to happen, and some love stories were worth the risk. Some love stories don't start with a perfect first meeting. Some don't begin with fate orchestrating the right moment at the right time. Some begin with a simple mistake, one that leads to something neither person could have ever expected. Emma Brooks never imagined that sitting at the wrong table would change her life. She never thought that the man she had mistaken for her blind date would be the one to steal her heart. And she certainly never thought that behind his warm smile, dry humor, and easy conversation, he was hiding a truth that could shatter everything. Liam Parker had spent his life surrounded by people who knew his name, who measured their words around him carefully, who saw his wealth before they saw him. But Emma had seen him as just a man, not as a billionaire, not as an empire builder, just as someone who listened, someone who laughed, someone who could sit across from her in a coffee shop and talk about art and dreams like they were all that mattered. And that was why he had held onto the lie for so long. Because once she knew the truth, she would see him differently. And when she found out, she did. Her trust was broken, her belief in him shattered. And for a moment, it seemed like their story had ended right where it had begun, with Emma walking away and Liam watching her go. But love, real love, doesn't crumble under mistakes. It bends, it breaks, but when it's strong enough, it finds a way to rebuild. Liam didn't try to fix things with money. He didn't try to buy her forgiveness. Instead, he gave her what she had always deserved, belief. Belief in her art, belief in her talent, belief that she was meant for more than struggling to be seen. And Emma? She had every reason to walk away, every reason to tell herself that love wasn't worth the risk. But in the quiet of that gallery, standing before the pieces of herself she had nearly abandoned, she realized something. She loved him, even when it hurt, even when trusting him again felt terrifying, even when she knew it wouldn't be easy. Because love isn't about never making mistakes. It's about choosing someone even after they do. And so, she gave him another chance. Not because of what he had done, but because of what he was willing to do to make things right. Their love wasn't built on wealth. It wasn't built on extravagant gestures or fairy tale perfection. It was built on trust, on honesty, on learning how to grow together after everything had fallen apart. Months later, as Emma opened the doors to her own art gallery, she knew she had built something that mattered, not just for herself, but for the young artists who had once been just like her, dreaming, but struggling to believe that their dreams could ever be more than that. Liam stood beside her, not as a man who had saved her, but as a man who had walked beside her, who had lifted her up, not with money, but with love. And when he dropped to one knee at the grand opening, looking up at her with the same quiet reverence he had held from the very beginning, she had known her answer before he even asked the question. Yes. Yes to the man who had made mistakes, but had fought to correct them. Yes to the love that had survived the breaking. Yes to a future where trust and honesty would always come first. Their wedding wasn't extravagant. It didn't need to be. Because love, real love, isn't measured in diamonds or grand ceremonies. It's measured in the quiet moments, the late-night talks, the laughter in the smallest corners of life, the promises whispered when no one else is listening. And as they danced beneath the gallery lights, the soft glow reflecting off the very walls where their journey had begun again, Emma knew one thing for certain. Sometimes the best things in life don't come from perfect beginnings. Sometimes they come from mistakes. And sometimes those mistakes lead you exactly where you were always meant to be. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a little reminder that second chances, love, and trust can change everything. And if you believe that the best stories come from unexpected beginnings, don't forget to subscribe for more tales of love, resilience, and the power of believing in something worth fighting for. Because in the end, the greatest love stories aren't the ones without flaws. They're the ones that choose to keep going anyway.